Shelley, could we do a quick sound check?
Hello, this is Shelley.
Hi, Shelley. Thank you so much. That's not me drinking. That's my dog. Sorry.
Alan, one more sound check.
This meeting is being recorded.
Wow. Alan, one more sound check as I change the phone audio.
Yes, hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Alan. Are we in a good place to get started?
I believe so. It is 1 o'clock and we have a whole host of our team online. So I will pull down the welcome screen and we can get going.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. This is Wes Brooks, Chief Resilience Officer for the state of Florida and Chair of the Florida's Coral Reef Coordination Team. We're joined by some really outstanding folks backing us up in the audio and technical sphere, and our lead coordinator, Alan Childress. So thank you, Alan, and Adam and the whole OERI team. Also joined here today by our vice chair of the team, Eric Stabenow from National Park Service. So we'll get this thing rolling. One of the first things that we just like to do very quickly is announce one change in the team. Chris Eggleston has stepped down from the voting member position for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the Florida Keys National Wildlife Refuge Complex. And in his place, we have added Jen Feltner. So thank you, Jen, for being here today. And I think this is a lifetime commitment for you now. So I don't know if Chris reflected that for you or not, but at least until you find another victim, we're glad to have you here. Additionally, Monroe County has filled their non-voting seat on the team with Shelley Kruger. So thank you, Shelley, for being here. And I'll actually let you guys start off when we get to the opening remarks for team members, just to introduce yourselves a little bit. I'd like to take a minute to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and webcast live on the OERI YouTube channel. And there will be opportunity for public comment towards the conclusion of this meeting. My opening remarks are going to be fairly simple. I'm excited about the time we have here together. I think this team and its coming together sort of represents a new consensus about the importance of Florida's coral reef within the South Florida ecosystem. And we have a really unique opportunity here to set some really important goals, not just for Florida's coral reef recovery, but also for Everglades restoration. In addition, we're not just at a neat time because we are all coming together to do this. We actually have resources starting to flow into this work and into the system in general. I'd just like to highlight some of the framework for freedom budget that the governor just signed into law in the last week. There's $1.6 billion in state funding for Everglades restoration and water quality projects across the state, $950 million for land conservation, $322 million for the Resilient Florida program that aims to help deal with especially stormwater infrastructure in the state, $100 million for the new Indian River Lagoon Protection Program that's also going to help reduce nutrient loading in that very important body of water on the northern end of Florida's coral reef. And then the highest level of funding in state history for projects on Florida's coral reef, greater than $20 million assigned directly to spending on the reef itself. And then there's some other pots of money that will lead to some other indirect benefits to the reef. That includes $9.5 million for a new governor's initiative, the Florida's Coral Reef Restoration and Recovery Initiative, that aims to help set some new foundations, technological, workforce, just having the sheer capability to produce new coral specimens for outplanting, getting that all ready so that the aim is to be ready to restore 25% of the reef by 2050. And that's a really exciting, audacious goal. But that's where we were about 30 years ago with Everglades Restoration. And so it's really exciting to see these two kind of important, gigantic restoration projects taking place here in Southeast Florida in particular. With that, I'll turn it over to Eric for opening remarks from the federal side.
Yeah, that was really well said, Wes. So what's happening right now is a phenomenal acceleration on the rate going on the state-federal partnership on Everglades restoration itself on the inland work. And we are having a really unique opportunity that is in with this year of this program, near and dear to my heart, this idea of understanding our water quality monitoring program and getting at the efforts to make sure that the monitoring we're doing are sufficient and appropriate and are well targeted to detect the types of changes and the types of impacts that we would expect out of the restoration program for the overall coral reef ecosystems. And that, that includes everything all the way up to the shoreline and mangrove fringe out to the reef. And it includes not just quantities of water and distribution of water, but the nutrient related loading that we're dealing with and other generalized topics that just make our environment better along the coastline. So this is a really great opportunity that I don't think can be done in any other way. It has to be this type of state and federal partnership, and it has to be done in these types of forums where we're getting input from so many really high qualified partners, just bringing the minds together to figure out how to do this right. So really great opportunities, really glad to be together with the group today. And I think that's all I have for the opening shot, and I will pass it over to Mr. Adam Gelber of OERI.
Adam is having some audio. Let's see if he can connect. Hi, Adam.
Hey, Alan, sound check.
Perfect. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm going to reboot after this, but just wanted to take a moment to say thanks to everybody. And Alan, I'd like to say thanks to you for your leadership here and helping out the OERI, and Eric and Wes as well. And look forward to the discussion. And just as a reminder, it serves as an advisory role to the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Working Group and Science Coordination Group. The team's progress will report back to the task force at the next meeting, which we're planning for right now. Date should be finalized of November 15th in Washington, D.C. So really, again, I appreciate all the time and dedication to this important issue, and those that are attending and participating, listening in, staying involved. Reefs are extremely important. I'll be out there diving with my son this weekend. And so look forward to the conversation. Alan, again, thanks so much, and I'll turn it over to you for some of the other administrative things about the platform. Thanks.
Certainly. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for participating, both the team members and members of the public. Just wanted to remind everyone that members of the public who have not provided their name and affiliation will be removed by the administrator for security purposes. Please note that all attendees are automatically muted and are in listen-only mode. Please refrain from raising your hand until the public comment period has been announced. Raised hands before the public comment period will be lowered by the Zoom administrator. Once the public comment period begins, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will call on you and unmute your microphone one at a time. When you have been called on to speak, please ensure that all other devices are muted to avoid any background noises and interruptions. And if any attendee experiences any Zoom technical issues during the meeting, you can access the live webcast on EvergladesRestoration.gov, where you'll find a link to the YouTube channel. And Wes, that is all for the administrative comments that I have.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Alan, and Adam. Again, thank you for all the hard work you and your team are doing every day to manage all these different balls we've got in the air. I want to take a quick moment to recognize a couple of folks from the working group and science coordination group who are with us today. We have Mark Rains from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, John Mayle from Martin County, Ed Smith from DEP as well, Amy Castaneda from the Miccosukee Tribe, Larry Williams from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Joan Browder from NOAA, Veronica Harold James from the Department of Justice, and Melody Naja from the National Park Service. So again, appreciate all of you all being here as well and keeping close tabs on our work on behalf of the working group and science coordination group, and for your continued partnership. Yes, Alan.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know all of those members we're anticipating their participation, but you do have right now Karen Bonzak from NOAA online.
Perfect. And thank you, Karen, as well for being here. Karen is a fabulous contributor to this work through her role in NOAA as well. So I'm sure we'll talk more about what Karen's been up to soon. So thank you for being here. At this point, I think we can head over to the meeting summary approval. I'd just like to ask very quickly, make sure everybody has had a chance to read the meeting summary document. If you have some issue with that or haven't had a chance to take a look at it, please go ahead and raise your hand now. All right, seeing no hands raised, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the meeting summary from March.
I'll
This is
submit the
Sarah
motion.
Langman West. I'll make that motion.
Or Sarah.
Thank
Eric,
you,
will I
Sarah.
second it then?
Second from Eric. All those in favor, we are going to ask again for hands raised if you are not in favor of meeting approval, sort of reverse from usual. Give that a couple seconds. Okay, seeing no opposition, meeting summary is approved from March. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Eric. We're going to head now into the member updates. I'm going to go through the list as I have it here, so bear with me. It's a little more difficult in the virtual context. You don't feel like you need to speak, but I'd really like to utilize this time for agency updates, letting everybody else know what your agencies are working on the Florida Coral Reef tract, and as well as potential funding opportunities that may be coming available that may be of interest to other agencies and or the public at large watching. So with that, we're actually going to start with our newest member, Jen Feltner from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Jen, please introduce yourself.
Hi, can everybody see me?
You're good.
Okay, great. So I'll just say it's great to be here. I'm rapidly trying to get up to speed on everything you guys have done, and I'm excited to be here and learn. So I am the refuge biologist at the Florida Keys National Wildlife Refuge Complex. I've been here for about a year. I do actually have more of a background in terrestrial biology, but I'm really excited to learn, and I've certainly been learning that in my work here in the Keys. And I did hear from Chris today that we apparently at Fish and Wildlife have a dive team that is looking for projects, and so that could be a resource that we could offer in the future towards this effort.
Great. Thank you so much and welcome aboard, Jen.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to Sarah Fangman from the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You can hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay, a couple of updates, and then I will also, oh, well, I guess you'll pass it to other NOAA people, right, Wes? You don't want me to do that?
Yep, I'll just keep going
Okay.
down our list here.
All right. Well, then I'll just talk about Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Couple of quick updates, big picture stuff. Many of you are probably familiar, the sanctuary has been in an effort to revisit our management of the entire sanctuary. We call this our restoration blueprint effort. And we have done recent public comments, received a lot of input on the proposals. As I mentioned, it's a very, very broad collection of proposals that we're examining as a part of that. And now where we are in that is in discussions with our state and federal colleagues, taking all of the input we've received and determining collectively what we can agree upon as a final set of proposed regulations to implement and potential changes to how we manage the sanctuary. So we are in the middle of meetings with our state and federal colleagues, state DEP and FWC and Fish and Wildlife Service, to talk through any places where we might still have some distance between where we want to land. So we're underway with all of that. So that's the restoration blueprint at the highest level. Another thing I want to quickly mention for this audience, another big project we've got going on in the Florida Keys is something called Mission Iconic Reefs. This is a pretty ambitious effort to try to return 7 iconic reef sites in the Florida Keys to historic or higher levels of coral cover. So somewhere in the order of 25% is our goal. And we are pleased that we've had some good news with regard to funding recently. The bipartisan infrastructure law, there was some funding provided for projects that supported recovery and resilience, and some of our partners in Mission Iconic Reefs, specifically Moat Marine Lab and Coral Restoration Foundation, were recipients of just about, collectively together, they got about $9 million just through that funding source for Mission Iconic Reef. So that's fantastic. We're very excited about that. We have outplanted about 30,000 corals so far as a part of Mission Iconic Reefs at those 7 sites. I will say that we are all paying very close attention to weather right now, because I know we all know it's been really hot and it's really early, and those corals don't like really hot, and we're already starting to see stress. We've seen this before, this isn't new, but it seems to be quite concerning this year. So agencies, again, federal agencies, DEP and FWC, have been working together to develop protocols to address some of the stresses that come from heat temperature stress, as well as transport stress, outplant stress. So while I'm very, very excited about the progress we're making with that ambitious effort for restoration of some of these reefs, we do have continued challenges when trying to do that, and the agencies are trying to work with the practitioners to develop best practices, if you will, to address those continued challenges so that we can see the best possible success with that effort. The last thing I will mention, although it's not my Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, but Wes, you asked us to make mention of funding opportunities, and this one I think would be of interest to this audience, and it is a NOAA funding opportunity that came out quite recently from the NOAA Climate, it's a Climate Resilience Regional Challenge, and it's from the Office of Coastal Management. I will put a link in the chat so that it can go into the notes, but it is a funding opportunity of $575 million. So it's a big pot of money, and they're looking for projects to help build resilience in coastal communities to extreme weather, as I was just talking about, and other impacts from climate change, including sea level rise and drought. So I thought that would be of interest to this group. It is, as I said, a very large chunk of money. And as soon as I'm done talking, I will plop that link for anyone who's interested in the chat, so people can put it in the notes and people can check it out if they're interested. With that, I will cede the floor back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great update. Thank you for all that hard work you're doing. Fingers crossed on water temperatures. And yeah, that's a nice big pot of money that just came out. The vast majority of it for actual implementation and adaptation projects. So please take a look at that if folks haven't done so already. I think Wade Lehman, you're on from EPA.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm going to keep my video off because it's really choppy for me for some reason. Sorry for that. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and wanted to bring forth a couple things just for people's awareness. The South Florida program run through EPA here currently has a request for proposals out, an RFA on grants.gov. And like Sarah, I will drop a link into the chat here at the end. It's currently closing the middle of July, I believe the 14th. It's approximately $8 to $9 million with a project cap at about $650,000 per project. So a lot of opportunity there in coastal South Florida. Additionally, many of you are aware EPA's proceeding with what we're calling REMAP, which is a water quality monitoring effort for the entirety of the Everglades. So it's quite relevant to Florida Bay as well as some of the other coastal waters. And that's set to kick off this fall. Hopefully the weather cooperates with us and we can get out there and get that done too. I would just like to note too that under BIL, there are a couple of other avenues where we have provided additional funds to our national estuary programs, both the Indian River Lagoon and the Coastal and Heartland on the east and west coast. And they are also using a lot of that money towards resilience and coastal issues as well. I believe that's all the updates I had from EPA. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Wade. Oh, Sarah, do you have your hand up?
I do. I probably should have checked to see if I have access to a chat before I offered to put something in a chat, because I don't.
We're trying to get that started up for you. No worries.
Sorry.
So I think what would actually work well on that front, Alan, is if we could actually collect all these and then post it with links in a separate document on the website related to this meeting. And that way the public will all have access to it too.
We can do that.
I will send it to you then, Alan.
Yeah, please send all these opportunities, the links and things to Alan, and we'll get that all together.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gil McRae from FWC. How you doing, Gil?
Hey, everyone. So I'm Gil McRae with FWC. I'm the director of our Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, which is the research division within FWC. And many of you know that we have been conducting monitoring on Florida's coral reef for nearly 30 years. Those long-term programs continue, both fixed station and randomized monitoring, the DRM monitoring, as well as some specialized work tied to stony coral tissue loss disease. So we continue to provide that foundational monitoring data that will inform how the reef is doing going forward, either through natural recovery, fingers crossed, or in response to restoration activities. I will also highlight that we continue to apply funding that we were able to program to coral work from Hurricane Irma fishery disaster funding. There was coral damage during that hurricane. That funding has begun to be applied to build out our coral, rescue coral housing and ultimately propagation infrastructure development with partners in Florida and elsewhere around the country. In partnership with DEP, one of the elements of implementing the new state-sponsored coral reef resiliency restoration effort is to continue to expand that propagation infrastructure to support restoration and build capacity, because we simply do not have enough expertise in this general area, and we've got to do some training. And developing that training will be a major step forward, I believe. So good to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Gil. Nikki Morgan with DEP.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for allowing me some time to give some updates on BMAPs. So some non-coral updates leading to some water quality improvements for waters going offshore. Part of the new legislation that was released in HB 1379 created that Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. And in that is research and water quality monitoring funding. So any research and water quality monitoring programs that would be monitored within the Indian River Lagoon BMAP could be funded through that project. It also created a statewide water quality improvement grant. So the normal Division of Wastewater Restoration Assistance used to be called the Wastewater Quality Grant, is now the Water and Quality Improvement Grant. And so that is a statewide funding source. You don't have to be in a BMAP for that one. And the proposals will be, the portal for that for proposals will be open in July. So some new funding opportunities for that. And then for trying to improve water quality, we have started new legislation that does not allow for new developments on 1 acre or less within a BMAP. So you have conventional septic systems. If sewer is available, those new developments will have to be connected to sewer systems. And if sewer is not available, they will have to use advanced treatment septic systems. So there's several different options for that. So something for people to be thinking about. And that law becomes applicable July 1st this year.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. And I'm just going in alphabetical order here. So we are next going to CJ Sweetman with FWC, Division of Marine Fisheries Management.
Thanks, Wes. As Wes said, my name is CJ Sweetman. I am the Federal Fisheries Section Leader for FWC's Division of Marine Fisheries Management. I also sit on the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, and I live in the Florida Keys. So coral is just a daily part of my life. We're all, my role as a fisheries manager is to really ensure that we have sustainable fish and invertebrate populations for Florida and state and federal waters for generations to enjoy. And really excited about being part of this group here because we all recognize the connectivity between water quality issues, things that are going on in the Everglades, and how that translates up into the food web. And one of my main role is ensuring that endpoint product there in terms of our fisheries are in a sustainable position here. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing here can make some great progress to kind of highlighting that connectivity in the way that we manage our ecosystems. Just some really brief updates for you on the marine fisheries side of things here. Sarah Fangman mentioned that we are actively working with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, as well as Florida Department of Environmental Protection on kind of the Florida Keys restoration blueprint and making progress on that towards the final rule. And then she also highlighted some things that we're actively working on in terms of standardized protocols for coral nurseries, transport, and outplanting. But one other thing that happened relatively recently that's relevant to this group here is on May 4th, Governor DeSantis, as part of the National Defense Reauthorization Act, designated 2 members from the state of Florida as non-voting members to the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force. These people will be Jessica McCauley. She is actually the director for FWC's Division of Marine Fisheries Management, and she sits on the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, as well as Dr. Tom Fraser, who is the vice chair of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. Now, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with Tom. Yeah, that's great representation from the state of Florida, people that are directly connected to our fisheries and our coral reef ecosystem. That's it. Back to you, Wes.
Great. Thank you so much, CJ. Kicking it next to Joanna Walzak from DEP's Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually perfect to follow CJ because I can give a couple of updates as it relates to our national efforts and our local efforts. So I'll start local level. As Wes mentioned in the opening, we have had such a tremendous year of support from the governor and legislature as it relates to coral reef related funding through the department. My program administers that funding. And so we have over $21 million going towards coral reef protection and restoration efforts this year, of which we have a recurring $8 million that goes to support efforts like stony coral tissue loss disease response, including research, intervention, restoration, coral rescue, kind of all of the things that we've been doing for the past almost 7 or 8 years now. But water quality priorities are part of that, and including supporting the ongoing water quality monitoring in the northern part of the reef. This year, we received over $11 million in proposals for that pot of $8 million. And so it's a really great competitive year where we think we got some really strong projects to move us forward. Wes also mentioned, though, that there's a $9.5 million new Florida's Coral Reef Restoration and Recovery Initiative grant. So we're calling it FCR3 for short. That's the governor's new initiative. It's a joint collaborative initiative between DEP, FWC, and Wes's office, the Chief Resilience Office. in ultimately moving us forward in establishing, expanding, and maintaining in-state propagation and grow-out facilities, developing and implementing strategic and site-specific restoration plans specifically focused on the northern reefs. So Sarah mentioned that the Florida Keys Natural Marine Sanctuary has the Mission Iconic Reefs program. And what we ultimately want to do is expand the concept of that program to the northern reefs so that we're ensuring that we are protecting and restoring the entirety of Florida's coral reef. Part of that is, as Gil mentioned, is that we need to also basically stand up a new trained workforce for this. We can build all of the infrastructure we can, but if there's no one there to work it, it won't ultimately be successful. And so part of it is also developing that curriculum and starting the pipeline of this new industry. And ultimately, all of this is to reinforce and expand restoration efforts across Florida's coral reef. So that particular, and Nikki had mentioned earlier that there's a state website where we have all of our funding opportunities available. And I'm just going to pull it up really quickly to show everyone, just to make sure that we're all familiar with it. So please let me know that you can see the page that says grants. Thank you, Wes. So this is the Protecting Florida Together website, and this is where all of the department's grant funding opportunities will be available. This is last year's funding opportunities. As soon as this year's funding opportunities are available, the site will be updated with those open grant things. Last year, we didn't have a Florida's Coral Reef grant program, and so it won't be listed on this page until I believe July 5th is when they're going live. I do know, though, that applications for all of these are going to be open until August 31st. And so it is a nice 2-month window for many of the different grant funding opportunities that the department offers. Speaking of, my program also oversees a $20 million Biscayne Bay water quality improvement grant, which is specifically focused on reducing nutrient impacts to Biscayne Bay. And so that will also be available here on this website. And while I'm here, I just wanted to take a moment to also show some of the other functionality, if I may. Let me just make sure that I'm getting to. Oh, it's not going to let me show it right now, but there's also a really great water quality database that's linked here. There we go, a statewide map. That if I haven't already shared this with you all, I think it's really important that you know that this product exists, because I think it'll be great to inform a lot of our initial discussions as we go down the water quality realm. But this ultimately is a map that looks at impairments and the data that support the impairments as related to water quality. And so there's a lot of data behind this, but it's a really nice, easy to use platform that gives you a very quick summary in specific areas of basic water quality in that area, and whether or not it's attaining standards or not attaining standards. So it's very straightforward. Again, we'll make sure that everybody gets the link to this particular website, because I'm sure you're going to want to spend some time looking around, but just wanted to share that. Switching to the national platform, as CJ mentioned, the U.S. Coral Reef Conservation Act passed in December. We mentioned that on the last call. And part of that is the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force is working on creation of a national resilience strategy for coral reefs. And so I, as the governor and secretary of DEP's representative, am the state point of contact for all coral reef issues here in Florida. And I'll represent all of us beyond the fisheries discussion, but I'm very excited to have our new members on the fisheries side of the house, because both of them have coral reef backgrounds, and we'll be able to have a really powerhouse showing at the US level as it relates to coral reef management. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Joanna. And as always, we are grateful for you taking on so much without additional salary demands. So that's just kidding. Next, Dana Usinich Mendez from NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. How are you, Dana?
Great. Hi, I'm great. How are you, Wes? Hi, everybody.
Doing well.
Hopefully you can hear me. I've been having so many mic and speaker problems today.
You are good right now, coming through loud and clear.
And I'll try to get through this quickly before problems arise. Couple quick updates. NOAA Coral Program has kicked off our support for the development of a watershed management plan for the government cut inlet contributing area. Our approach to addressing water quality issues in our 7 coral reef states and territories has been to support the delineation of watersheds that are key contributors to water quality and important coral reef areas. And so in Florida, the approach has been to delineate the 9 inlet contributing areas associated with the 9 inlets adjacent and that feed into the coral reef ecosystem in Southeast Florida. And so a watershed management plan was developed for the Boynton Inlet contributing area. And the second one that was selected for this process was government cut. So we had a team of consultants come down in May, had some great discussions with both DEP as well as Miami-Dade, and they're going to be working over the coming year to agree on the scope, geographic scope and focus for that watershed management plan that we hope will lead to a roadmap for increased action to make water quality improvements in the region. Our Coral Reef Fellowship Program cycle for the FY 25-26 class of Coral Fellows, or 24-25, sorry, kicks off this week. And so hopefully I can send out an announcement very soon. We're hoping to place a new Coral Reef Management Fellow in Florida come January to support the state's efforts. In terms of funding opportunities, I actually did send the web link for the opportunity out of the Office for Coastal Management that Sarah shared. I sent that to Wes and Alan via email, so hopefully you can share that. In terms of funding opportunities from the Coral Reef Conservation Program, we're getting our new round of state and territory cooperative agreements out the door. Florida will be first out of the gate with a July 1 start date. Most of the other jurisdictions that we work with start their cooperative agreements in October. In terms of other funding opportunities, keep your eyes peeled, and I'll be sharing updates. Many of you are aware that our authorizing legislation, the Coral Reef Conservation Act, was reauthorized in late last year, and it calls for some new funding opportunities, and we're working to develop these new grant programs so that when federal funding is appropriated to support them, we're going to be ready to implement those. And you may have also seen a call out for the development of our National Coral Resilience Strategy. If you haven't seen that and would like more information, please let me know. There was a notice that went out asking for input on our current program strategy, strengths, weaknesses, and new areas for emphasis. A lot of those discussions to feed into the development of that strategy are happening through the various work groups of the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, and Florida has great representation across those working groups. So if you're not involved and would like more information on the development of that strategy as it evolves, please let me know. I'll be happy to keep everyone engaged in that. And that's it from NOAA Coral Program.
Thank you, Dana. Audio came through great the entire time. We're going to shift to our non-voting membership. And again, I want to cede the floor first to Shelley Kruger, our newest member representing Monroe County. Shelley, please introduce yourself to the team.
Hello, thank you. So I am representing Monroe County. Most of you know me as I'm the Florida Sea Grant agent in Monroe County for the University of Florida IFAS Extension. And this is actually a partnership with the county. So they asked me to join this committee. I'm also on quite a list of other committees that I'll go through briefly, but I think the most relevant one to this group is the steering committee for the Water Quality Protection Program through the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And I am also the chair of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council's Coral Advisory Panel. And I'm heavily involved in the stony coral tissue loss disease response since I co-lead the communication team for that response. I want to say since 2019. So I'm happy to join the group and thank you very much. Oh, and I'm looking.
I think, oh, we lost that last sentence, Shelley.
I am located in Key West.
Right. Thank you, and glad to have your expertise on the panel. Cassandra Armstrong from South Florida Water Management District.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's kind of hard to follow all of these amazing announcements and funding opportunities with I have no updates for you and I have no funding opportunities for you. But I'll introduce myself, Cassandra Armstrong. I'm the section administrator for the coastal ecosystem section, part of the Water Management District. And we are looking for opportunities for water quality improvement and better freshwater delivery to our coastal environments. So I'll be looking very closely at some of those grants that you guys have available, and hopefully we can get a project going, but I have no updates for you. So thanks very much.
No problem. Thank you, Cassandra. And always happy to talk to Drew for you. Just shoot me a note.
I will do.
I believe Angela Delaney from Broward County is on the phone. Angela, can you unmute?
Can everyone hear me? I'm sorry.
We can hear you.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm on the road right now driving, so I'll just do a quick summary. My name's Angela Delaney. I'm the Marine Resource Program Manager at Broward County. We have a lot of programs aimed at conserving and protecting our offshore reefs, including a mooring buoy program and a artificial reef program, both aimed at relieving the pressure of the usage of the natural reef. In addition, our environmental lab does participate in the Department of Environmental Protection's water quality monitoring program, and we continue to partner with the agencies in the disease response monitoring that occurs every year. In addition, we are helping or supporting and aiding in the development of restoration planning for the ecosystem conservation area, the northern portion of our Florida reef. But I'm going to do this really quickly just because I am driving, but I'm happy to be joining today and want to say hello to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Drive safely. I believe Deb Drum from Palm Beach County could not be with us, but we have Caitlin Armstrong in her place. Caitlin?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, Deb might join. She might hop on at mid-discussion, but nice to meet you, Caitlin Armstrong with Palm Beach County. I'm the Reef Program Manager for the Palm Beach County, but so we handle a lot of projects similar to Angela's, artificial reefs, mooring buoys for the same reasons. And then natural reef monitoring and restoration. One thing I'll say is we have funding this year from DEP, or we will very soon, to get involved in more restoration out on the natural reef, and we're looking forward to that. And hopefully more projects like that where we're actually taking corals post STTLD and putting them back out there. You can see in the dashboard that we have other water quality programs, but I don't head them up. There are other people at Environmental Resources Management that lead those. So happy to be here. Deb can talk way more about those water quality programs, but she should be on any minute.
No problem. Thank you for being here, Caitlin. Laura Eldridge has got my alphabetical order all worked out. She's up next from Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. So Laura Eldridge, I'm the Miami-Dade County Restoration Enhancement Section Manager within Miami-Dade County DERM. So we've had a couple fun announcements. I mean, our staff are continuing our normal offshore field season. So we're doing coral disease reconnaissance surveys, artificial reef annual surveys. We also assist FWC with our Goliath grouper surveys, among some of the other projects. We're actually expanding our offshore mooring buoy program. We're happy to announce that we're trying to add 12 more mooring buoys. We finalized permits with the regulatory agencies. So thank you to those agencies for that. We hope to formally announce the successful implementation and installation of those mooring buoys at the next meeting. We'll also be updating our brochures to make sure that we have the proper public outreach, and we'll be sending those out. Our big announcement is that our South Florida water quality monitoring program within the county, or a Bay Run program, as a lot of you are probably used to hearing, successfully completed a 40% expansion of our water quality sites. So that gets us to almost 140 water quality sites that we're sampling every single month, land-based sites and boat-based sites throughout the entire county. We're not formally announcing it yet because we're still trying to work right now in terms of, demoing some of the sites, potentially moving some of the coordinates, things like that. So it's a little bit of a preliminary announcement as well on that, but we're super excited that we're able to complete that. We're continuing to move forward with our reasonable assurance plan. So our water quality improvements towards water quality and restoration, working with our contractors to kind of, go back to step one a little bit. We kind of had to scrap our initial plan, but we're working together with our contractor to move that forward and hopefully be able to discuss that further with y'all in future meetings. I was going to talk about the GovCut watershed management plan, but Dana kind of stole a little bit of thunder there. But yeah, we're looking forward to continuing that support with DEP and NOAA. And then also we've received an internal allocation that's really provided us with a lot of money to replace and update our water quality instrumentation. So we're excited that we've got a lot of those orders in. We received several of them. And we're moving forward with the capacity to increase water quality sampling via handheld probes, but also data sondes on our offshore sites, and making sure that we have things like field cables that can reach, 100 feet deep. So we're looking forward to this team's discussions on how we can really best align with what potential water quality expansion and offshore sampling the county can contribute to. And that's it.
Really appreciate that, Laura. Thank you. Ian Enix from NOAA AOML.
That's me. I also have no funding opportunities for you guys. I'm sorry. But I can hit you with a couple quick science updates. We have our Walton Smith water quality crews throughout the Florida Keys that will be out on the water from the 22nd of July to the 28th, hitting about 90 different CTD stations and 46 underway stations. So this is like a bi-monthly water quality cruise that covers all throughout the Keys and then around Florida a fair bit. We will be spinning up some Mission Iconic Reefs related climate monitoring, which I think is really cool and also highly applicable to the stuff that we're talking about here. We just finished up the development of a robotic system for water quality and nutrient application, moving from these type of experiments that just have high, medium, low, that is really kind of hard to do any management kind of decisions on to stuff where we will be applying roughly 250 different individual water quality levels to really find these thresholds and do these regression analyses for these important species. That's work that was funded in part through DEP, which is pretty awesome. Just finished up an experiment related to that. I just had a paper come out a little bit ago, but I think it was since our last meeting on water quality in the Port of Miami. And corals that have been able to persist in that environment despite all the things that they're dealing with. With that, I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Keep up the good work. Is Elizabeth Kelly from Martin County on? Okay.
I don't believe so, Wes.
No problem. And then I think Chris Kellogg is on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere. So
Yes.
we'll work on the Starlink access next time around. Last but not least, if she's on with us, Gina Ralph. There you are.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I have no funding opportunities to share.
And I would be remiss if I didn't, as the Recover program manager, mention an upcoming workshop that Recover is going to host along with the science coordination group to talk about all of the monitoring that's ongoing within the South Florida ecosystem restoration footprint. So a lot of your agencies have already provided us with a monitoring inventory spreadsheet that we will be using to help evaluate monitoring that's ongoing, identify gaps, identify overlaps, and look for leveraging opportunities in order to update our comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, monitoring and assessment plan. So the workshop is again the 19th and 20th of July in West Palm Beach at South Florida Water Management District's auditorium. Please look for an upcoming link on the OERI website for all of the information. But nothing on behalf of the Corps of Engineers today. Thank you for your time and participation.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you for raising the Recover workshop. I hope everybody is able to get on and see that because it dovetails really nicely with some of the work that we're doing here. Next up, I know we're running a little bit behind, so I'm gonna work to do some catch up later on. But somebody who I don't want to give short shrift to is Eva Velez from the Army Corps of Engineers, coming to us from Jacksonville today. Eva knows what she's talking about. That's why she's here. We love to have her. She is doing some amazing work on the planning side for ecosystem restoration in particular. Last time we had Bob Johnson and Jennifer Reynolds come on, and they talked and gave an overview of Everglades restoration and a little bit about Recover. We learned that there's some changes afoot, right? Operationally and also with infrastructure. We wanted to invite Eva to come and give us a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the projects that are anticipated to have more impact on the coastal system and the reef in particular. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eva. And thank you again for your time and for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Thank you, Alan. Are you the one driving, ma'am? Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the team. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I am the chief of the ecosystem branch of the Jacksonville district. I am based in South Florida, so that I can be close to our work and our implementation and our stakeholders. And my job is to be the lead integrator of the planning, design, construction, and operations and maintenance of the Everglades Restoration Program for the Jacksonville district. Next slide, please. Today I will go over the projects in a very high level that correspond to benefits not only to the coast, but how the activities on the land and the watershed affect the near shore and the areas of interest to all of you. So on the left, you have a picture of the area where our activities occur. And it's got a few important layers to it that I'll talk you through. So first, you see the white outline of our entire boundary for the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program. And that corresponds with the boundary of our partner in this effort, who you heard from a few months ago, the South Florida Water Management District. And the beneficiaries, the official beneficiaries of the Everglades Restoration Program are those shaded areas that are called Recover regions. And Recover is an acronym, which is the science arm of the Everglades Restoration Program. And so our beneficiaries that are included within our authorizing language given to us by the Congress in 2000 are Lake Okeechobee, the Northern Estuaries, the Greater Everglades, Southern Coastal Systems, and then the most recent addition is the Southwest area or the Southwest module. And so those shaded areas there are where our team focuses the benefits to the ecosystem, the water delivered to the natural system is monitored in the baseline condition as well as in the with project condition or with the increments of project conditions. And then, of course, we have a lot of other beneficiaries, which are the people that live within those communities that relate to the ecosystems in the area. The projects, in many cases, have multiple parts. And I will focus a little bit today on the ones that are in Miami here in just a few minutes. But in a large picture, if we focus our eye there on Lake Okeechobee, you'll notice that there's some circles that are white and some circles that are blue. And those are identified as SERP or non-SERP projects. So the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan given to us by the Congress in 2000 has a framework of changes to the underlying system of canals, levees, spillways, pumps, and structures that manage water in South Florida that had a negative effect on the environment. And so the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan projects, the SERP projects that were given to us by the Congress are a change to that backbone system. And so beginning with those, the blue ones, if you start with Lake Okeechobee, I'm gonna walk you through like we're a drop of water and we're making our way from the north of the lake. And I'm gonna focus either on the center or on the eastern side of the map and thinking through the areas that would have an effect to the near shore or, you know, in some cases may have an effect further out, which I know is where your interest lies. So thinking about if you're a drop of water and you're north of Lake Okeechobee, we have a project north of the lake that has components of storage and wetland restoration. So the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project is in planning, and we are looking at adding several thousand acres of wetland restoration along the Kissimmee River north of Lake Okeechobee, as well as a component of underground storage, aquifer storage, and recovery wells. And so those two components go together, and then a third piece is being formulated by the South Florida Water Management District, which is an above ground storage reservoir with the acronym of LOCAR, Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir, which we certainly are tracking closely with them, and they have a goal of taking that for consideration to the Congress next year. So north of Lake Okeechobee for the SERP, we are thinking about storage. We are thinking about how to help water deliveries within the watershed that end up in Lake Okeechobee, because we recognize that the releases from Lake Okeechobee to the St. Lucie River and estuary to the east, to the Caloosahatchee River and estuary to the west, and to the Everglades to the south have a significant effect on the ecological function of the entire system. So you'll notice that around those, if you're looking at Lake Okeechobee, there's two white dots, and those are non-SERP. And what that means is that those either predated the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. In the case of the one there to the north, it's Kissimmee River Restoration. That one, the construction of that one is complete. We actually restored 40 miles of a river floodplain that we previously had channelized in recent years, and that was a big celebration. And so that one is what we call a foundation project. Within Lake Okeechobee, you'll notice there's one too, and that is the rehabilitation of the dike, the Herbert Hoover dike that surrounds Lake Okeechobee, which we completed construction earlier this year. We celebrated that, and many of you have heard the term LOSIM, the Lake Okeechobee System Operations Manual, which is the new operational strategy for the management of water levels and releases from Lake Okeechobee, with the knowledge that we have completed the rehabilitation of the dike around the lake, which has reduced risks, meaning it's safer, it's stronger, and we can think about the way we manage the water in the lake differently. We spent 4 years planning that with the public, with our stakeholders, with our partners, and that has a very marked change in the way we think about sending water to the east, to the St. Lucie River and estuary, from the current schedule, which is the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule from 2008. And so as you're thinking about how our actions within the land and within the water bodies affect the near shore, and you're thinking about the east, the Lake Okeechobee System Operations Manual plan, which is not yet fully realized. We have a few steps to go, which we have a target of the end of this year to complete. But that plan contemplates no releases from Lake Okeechobee to the St. Lucie River and estuary out of the lock to the east for the majority of the operational range. So when the lake itself is all the way up to 16.8, which is a specific number, but what that means is that the lake has to be pretty high. You know, about 80% of the time, we expect to have no releases to the east from Lake Okeechobee. And that will come when we're able to implement the Lake Okeechobee System Operations Manual. Moving along to the east, on where you see the words there, St. Lucie River, you can see a blue dot there, and that represents the Indian River Lagoon South project. That project was given to us by the Congress several years ago in one of the prior WRDAs. So think about around 2007. And it includes a complex of reservoirs, above ground reservoirs, and stormwater treatment areas, as well as broad conservation and wetland restoration within the area of St. Lucie County and Martin County, specifically targeting to change the way that the water is delivered from the basin. So not focused on Lake Okeechobee. In this case, it's focused on the basin itself, and it has a variety of actions. So it has a reservoir, which we have completed, called the C44 reservoir, right there where that dot is, actually. We have a very, very large reservoir that we've constructed, and we're doing an operational and testing monitoring period at this moment, which captures the water from the basin itself. That would be an unnatural delivery of fresh water to the river and the estuary, and disrupt the salinity balances of the seagrass habitat in the areas within the estuary and the near shore, and hold it, put it through a constructed wetland so that it's cleaner when you have to redeliver it. And so that's one example of what has been constructed, and we are doing more of those. We're under construction right now for additional stormwater treatment areas. The Corps currently is building a stormwater treatment area within the C23, C24 area. So it's a little bit further up than where that dot is. That will improve the quality of the water that is getting to the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. And after that, we will build additional reservoirs together with the South Florida Water Management Districts. And so that one has above ground storage, treatment, and broad wetland restoration, as well as in the river, in the river itself, there's muck removal and some artificial habitat creation. And so moving a little bit to the south, if you follow where the St. Lucie River is, there's another blue dot. That represents the Loxahatchee River Watershed Restoration Project, given to us by the Congress in 2020, the WRDA of 2020. That project contemplates 3 flowways for the benefit of the Loxahatchee River, which is a national wild and scenic river. And if some of you have had the benefit of participating and recreating in it in Palm Beach County, it certainly has a gradient from freshwater to saltwater habitats there. And what happens is that the Loxahatchee River itself has had disruptions in the delivery of freshwater, especially in the dry season. And so that project contemplates a northern flowway that's closer to Martin County that has wetland restoration. So the idea of land-based practices and holding more water on the landscape. It has a central flowway, which adds storage for delivery back to the wild and scenic river in the dry season. And then it has a southern flowway, which deals a little bit more with timing of flows. And so that one is really exciting that our sponsor, the South Florida Water Management District, is the lead for all of the design and construction of all of those flowways, and the Corps is there as a partner to do oversight for federal standards. And so as I've talked through some of these, you may be wondering, how am I going to remember all this information? And so that's what the image on the right is all about. And so I know many of you already, but some of you are new to me and I'm new to you. And so hopefully you will take advantage of this document that we call the Integrated Delivery Schedule. And so you see how it has these colored bands across the image there. Everything that I'm telling you is on that document. When the project was authorized, what all the features are, and the status of the design and construction of each of these features, and also when we think we're going to go into operations. And then also at the very bottom, you'll see that it's got a white set of rows, and those are planning. That means we have not yet gone to Congress for authorization to construct it, and we will as soon as we're finished going through the formulation of a feasibility analysis and talking to the public and our stakeholders and our partners about how we should best approach that. So if we then go back to the image on the left and we start looking at the lower East Coast, right? And so I'll point you to the middle, the yellow area, which is really important because that's where the Central Everglades project occurs. And so many of us know about the EAA reservoir, which is one of the parts of the Central Everglades project. It has actually 4 phases. And essentially what this is doing is reconnecting Lake Okeechobee to the Everglades. So when we built the system of canals, levees, and structures that allowed a lot of us to live here, the Central and Southern Florida system, we disconnected the natural connection from Lake Okeechobee to the greater Everglades, to the Central Everglades. And we sent it east and west, which has effects to the near shore along the eastern coast. The Central Everglades project and the EAA reservoir in particular, that piece of the Central Everglades project is the deliberate reconnection of Lake Okeechobee to the Everglades. That's why it's such a big deal and why it has such significant broad effects to the coast. Because the way we think about Lake Okeechobee and the way we think about sending water to the coast is affected by what we can do in the middle. And so that's why you've got that blue dot there in the middle with little arrows up and down where you've got the Everglades Agricultural Area and Water Conservation Area 3. It's because the sort of the crown jewel of the Central Everglades project is the EAA reservoir, and it comes together with a stormwater treatment area constructed by our sponsor, which they're almost done because they're spectacular. But that's not the whole story. So you need storage and you need treatment, but you also need to decompartmentalize the Everglades. So all that yellow that you see is the Everglades in compartments. And that has an effect on the timing of deliveries within the Everglades, but also it means we waste a lot of water to tide in that backbone system. And so the decompartmentalization, the reconnection of the Everglades within the Everglades are the other phases of the Central Everglades project. So moving along, if you notice the boundary of the yellow area with the human environment of the lower East Coast, there's projects along there. So I'll point you to, if you go down to Fort Lauderdale, and you go there and there's a blue, that is the Broward County Water Preserve area. And so what matters is that you want to keep Everglades water in the Everglades. And so if we spend all this time reconnecting Lake Okeechobee down into the Everglades, and you decompartmentalize the Everglades themselves, then you don't want to lose all that water. You want to keep it in the Everglades because it recharges the Biscayne aquifer in a natural, productive way. So you need projects in the buffer in between the Everglades and the human environment. And that's the Broward County Water Preserve. That's the purpose of that project. That project is actually in design, and the Corps will begin construction of that project next year. Okay, now we're going to Miami. And so in Miami, I'm going to do a little bit of a zoom in, and so I won't cover those on this slide. But important to remember is that the area of Miami, highly urbanized, and then bounded by Biscayne National Park and Everglades National Park. So Biscayne National Park to the east, Everglades National Park to the west, and then millions of people right there in between. And so what do we do about that? How do we deal with that? Next slide, please. Okay, so when we are trying to figure out how to bring all of the science together, that is what the image on the right is. And so our program manager for Recover, which is an acronym there that you see related to the science, monitoring, applied research, how do we answer the important risks and uncertainties on a system-wide basis? What are our targets? What are our goals? So those are the folks that help us keep our eye on the goal of Everglades restoration from a scientific perspective. And the circle there with all the different symbols are the members of Recover. And so for us, our program manager is Gina Ralph, who is on this team. And it is one of our ways that we integrate this large program is through science, through coordination and collaboration with others so that we can have diverse perspectives and understanding, including the federal level tribes. So we have the opportunity to learn from the Miccosukee tribe and the Seminole tribe and include indigenous knowledge into our work. We have our state partners, and then we have local partners as well. And so another way that we integrate and learn is that we have other programs that the Corps implements. And one that I just want to name for you that we can talk about another time is the Regional Sediment Management Center of Expertise. And so that is the idea that there's a whole bunch of sediment that is needed or released out into tide. And so how do we think about using that beneficially for other purposes? So the Corps has a whole group of people that think about that. And there are a series of projects that we implement in many different ways. Think about navigation, think about ports, think about beaches. So that's one area where we integrate science as well as different programs into the overall area for South Florida. And so we have, how do we model, how do we predict outcomes here for these big investments? We have an interagency modeling center that allows us to predict outcomes for all these projects before we take them to the Congress for consideration. We certainly have many other resilience projects that we can come back and tell you about. And then lastly, I want to highlight that our area, our region, was just recently identified as an engineering with nature proving ground, which is a really exciting program within the Corps to communicate how we think about nature in a way that helps us solve problems when we're recommending changes to the landscape. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so let's focus on Miami. In Miami-Dade County, we identify multiple projects that help us provide multiple lines of defense. And so as we're focused on the Everglades Restoration Program today, let's go from left to right. So if you go from the inland portion of the peninsula, the central portion, and you work your way towards the shore, you have the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which is thinking about how do we keep Everglades water in the Everglades, how do we recharge the aquifer, how do we decompartmentalize the Everglades, how do we redeliver lost water back to the Everglades. That's SERP. And then also, how do we manage seepage out of the Everglades? Then as we get towards the human environment, this doesn't just apply to Miami, this is also pretty much the whole lower East Coast. But in this example, we're thinking about the projects in Miami. So as part of Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan in Miami, we have two projects. One called the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands, which is under construction. And there's not that many in this image, but if you look at where the intercoastal waterway is there might be a few little green spaces left in Miami. And so the idea of the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands is that you take those remaining natural areas and you bring the natural hydrology back. You redistribute the flows into natural wetland areas instead of just pulsing them out to tide. That's still SERP. And then as you get into the middle portion where the people are, see how there's a canal that runs through the middle of that urban environment? So those canals and then the structures that let water out of those canals into the shore, into the coast, are being affected by climate change and sea level rise. And so we have a study called the Central and Southern Florida Flood Resiliency Study that targets specifically how to improve the function of those coastal structures and those canals so that they can continue to provide flood protection for the people within that urban environment and addressing a 70-year-old system that is having a hard time continuing to release water that it needs to for flood protection because we have impacts of climate change to that backbone system. So when we are thinking about solutions to that, which that's what we're trying to begin working on, the formulation of those solutions of the flood risk management portion, how do we think about it in such a way that we can do it in the most beneficial way, but also keeping our eye on flood risk related to climate change. Then as you look at the areas, you're getting closer to the shore. So within the core, we call those back bays. So if you think about the area that might be the intercoastal, the area that might not be governed by the managed system of the inland part, the fluvial part, the riverine system, you've got this sort of shoreline that may not be as managed, but it's highly, highly populated and highly vulnerable from a coastal storm perspective and climate change and sea level rise perspective. And so for the core, we call those back bay studies. So there's a Miami back bay study that's been going on for several years and is still happening at the moment. And so think about that as the view, the lens, the fix of a comprehensive coastal storm defense. So wind, wave, erosion, that's what those are about. And so they all come together in these urban environments, which are pretty challenging. And so how we think about how we deliver water, how we keep people safe affects the nearshore. And then finally, we have a very, very long history of protecting our people in Miami through beach renourishment projects. They help the economy, they help keep people coming in Miami, but they really are sort of the original line of defense for coastal storm defense. Next slide, please. So, focused on Biscayne Bay, focused on the model lands, focused on the southeastern Everglades. That's what BBCR is all about. And so the image on the left, I brought you into Miami. We looked at the cross section before. So the image that we just saw on the last slide, we went from the left part of this same image, but in a cross section, right? So now we're looking at it from an aerial perspective, and you have Everglades National Park to the left. You have a magenta outline of a study boundary. This is a feasibility study for solutions that can change how we deliver water through the canal system today, where we're losing water to tide, where we are having effects in the near shore and disrupting salinity regimes, where we might be cutting off wetland systems or natural areas from their watershed water. How do we think about that in the area in Miami so that we can benefit the southern glades? So Alan, if you don't mind pointing to the southern glades there with your marker, then over to the east with the model lands. And then we've got Biscayne Bay, Biscayne National Park, Manatee Bay, and those other ones. So that is the target, right? Those are the natural areas that we are trying to improve by having changes on the land through storage or conveyance through different flow paths or improvements in delivery. That's what's under contemplation at the moment and has been for the last year and a half or so, where the team is developing alternatives for consideration. Next slide, please. I'm having a delay. Is it me? Okay. Okay, so this is just a little bit more technical information about one of the goals of BDCR, which is a nearshore objective. And what we want is more of the part on the left-hand side of that cross-section, right? We want to change the delivery of fresh water along our coast. Instead of it going pulses along the canals, we want to find ways to deliver it in a more natural way. So we have more areas where we have the oligomesohaline strip along Biscayne Bay, Biscayne National Park, and Cartown, and those other areas. So that's a really big focus of BBCR. Next slide, please. So we covered this one already. This is that resiliency study that's looking at the backbone system. This one's more about flood risk. How do we improve upon an existing 70-year-old system of canals and structures? If you look on the image on the left, you'll see all these little yellow labels. Those are structures. Those are what governs how water gets released from the land onto tide. And those are not operating as well as they originally were designed because the sea level has risen. And so we can't let water out the way that it was designed to, which means there's an increased risk of flooding to the communities in the orange area as well as the green area. And that represents about 5 million people. Next slide, please. Okay. So I've talked a lot. Here's where you can get a lot more information. I would want you to think about, as you're looking forward, look at that middle one, recover, our science arm, because I know you're looking at monitoring, you're looking at existing data, and you have Gina on your team, Dr. Ralph on your team. So that would be where I would point you to moving forward. And then I think this is the end of my presentation. Turn it back to you, Dr. Brooks. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ava. Can we go back to the BBCer slide just real quick? Just want to ask a question and just make a point kind of simultaneously. So while Alan's doing that, so BBCer, you mentioned it's an ongoing planning study right now, feasibility study. Can you give sort of a broad overview of what those alternatives look like from a water delivery standpoint?
You bet. Alan, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so Alan, can you point to the North Bay? I just want to orient everybody. All right, so that's the North Bay. Then you have the Central Bay going a little bit further south. And then you have the South Bay. So Biscayne Bay is broken up into three pieces, generally speaking, right? So one of the things that the team, the project delivery team, which several of you are on it, are looking at is how do we reduce all those freshwater pulses to the North Bay? How do we change, because there's canals that run through that urban system. The canals run through from west to east or from northwest to southeast, depending on the area that we're looking at. And so those canals have these freshwater pulses, too much in the wet season, and therefore we don't have enough water left over for the dry season. So the North Bay is an area where some of the alternatives are targeting reduction of those freshwater deliveries. That's one of the things the team is looking at in the alternatives. Then in the Central and South Bay, looking at different storage up in the northwest part of the watershed, conveyance paths through the urban environment. So storage, conveyance paths, and then distribution along the shore. So the combination of storage, conveyance, and distribution, and there's several alternatives of that, is what the team is looking at. And then lastly, the team is evaluating a different source of water as reuse water. Wastewater reuse water is being considered as another source of fresh water that may prove, although expensive and complex, may prove very resilient to climate change. So that's very high level. Is that good, Wes?
It is, and I think that reuse water in particular has been something that Congress has pointed to for a number of years now, to have you all look at and keep in the alternative formulation. And so just on a very general level, the ultimate project that comes out of BBCer might be one that simply redistributes existing flows, or it might add some substantial new sources of flows, whether from the northwest part of the county or also this wastewater reuse option as well.
That's right. That's what we're looking at. We're working on figuring that out.
Yeah, so a whole range of opportunity there, really. And then one other just quick question for you: the 500-meter oligo-mesohaline strip that you all are looking at, where, if you can comment on that, or Dr. Ralph, where did that kind of boundary come from, and why are we settled on that? Because I think that will help inform some of our discussion about a monitoring framework too.
I will ask Gina or Dr. Browder, who I heard was on earlier, to talk about that. It's got its early roots. It's got its roots in early DNA of SERP, that target. But I'll see if our science folks want to answer that one.
So did you say Joan Browder was on? Because this is Joan's baby. So I want to let
Yeah,
her
that's
talk
why I
about
didn't want
it.
to speak for her if she wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't believe she's online. We were hoping she would be able to join, but we don't see her online right now.
Okay, so this is Gina Ralph. Good afternoon again. And I apologize, I'm going to have to jump in about 5 minutes to a Recover meeting that I'm actually hosting. So I apologize. So this has its roots early in the Reef study. Back in 1999, the group of scientists all came together to identify targets for various areas of our ecosystem. And this 500-meter oligo-mesohaline strip is what we were targeting within Biscayne Bay. And Recover has a monitoring and assessment plan that funds, in part, along with other federal sponsors, an I-beam program, which is a integrated Biscayne Bay environmental monitoring program where we're collecting all sorts of data. And all of that data has been synthesized and input into a performance measure, a really novel performance measure for assessing different alternatives and management measures as part of this Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades restoration plan. We have developed, in part, there's various indicators that we have for different types of marine flora and fauna to understand what type of habitat suitability may be produced as a result of the different changes in flow into Biscayne Bay from whatever management solutions we put on the ground here. So it's a really neat way to take all of the data, all of the monitoring information to develop a visual representation of how we can affect change on the landscape and within that strip.
All right. Well, thank you, Gina. I'm going to open it up to any other questions folks may have for Ava. Feel free to raise your hand if you have one. Yeah, Joanna, please.
Hi, not so much a question, but just a comment. If we can go back to the slide that was about, I think it was more about the overall approach to protection of the South Florida environment. I just wanted to know, one of the points that you made was that you consider beaches to be the first line of defense for South Florida. And as this group, I think, can attest, it's I'd like you to consider the fact that Florida's coral reef is your first line of defense for South Florida, because the reef protects the beaches. And so we're happy to add a little bubble there for you for the reef offshore, because I think it is an important part of this ecosystem approach to thinking about protection of these communities. That's all I have. Thank you.
I agree. The ocean protection with the land protection. I got you. Yep.
Any other comments or questions for Ava at this time? All right, well, thank you so much, Ava. We know how to track you down if we need more, and obviously we have Dr. Ralph from the Corps with us normally as well. So very much appreciate your time. We're gonna push it over right now to Joanna, and she is just going to update us on where we left off from the water quality monitoring survey work that we were working on in March.
Thanks, Wes. So as part of the read ahead, Wes sent out an updated spreadsheet of the DEP funded project that is kind of working towards unifying the water quality monitoring programs offshore. Thank you to those of you who submitted additional programs for consideration under this. We only received 3, and so it was relatively straightforward. There is a tab at the bottom of the spreadsheet that shows the 3 that were submitted, 2 of which were not eligible to be considered under the current study design, let me emphasize that, because they don't have nutrients included in their sampling. But the Palm Beach County data set, will be fully evaluated for inclusion in what we call the Big Seven in the next year of this program. The reason I emphasize that I wanted to call attention to the fact that this particular project was really focused on nutrient monitoring. And so I just wanted to highlight that that might not necessarily be the priority of this group, especially as it relates to detecting change from Everglades restoration projects. It might be more about salinity and temperature and things like that. And while the Big Seven or possibly 8 of Palm Beach County definitely have those data sets to be compared, there are, let's see, this new spreadsheet shows about 20 or 30 different data sets that may have salinity and temperature that could be evaluated. Now, that's a very big lift to evaluate all of those different programs. And so I think what it might boil down to is a conversation, again, about what our priorities are with this group and how this unified project could inform where we want to go. But I'm happy to say that the project team we refer to them as the water quality data team. They're willing to work with us to kind of figure out the best step forward into the new fiscal year. So they've got funding from DEP to assist this group if we'd like it. And I just wanted to put that out there as an offer for everybody. Does anybody have any questions on the spreadsheet as it is, or any other programs that you want to throw in for consideration? It's pretty comprehensive at this point, and I think it's a great first step, but we just wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything really obvious.
Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you, Joanna. Did you have anything else on that front?
Nope, that's it, Wes. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. And we will get that posted to the team website as well at the conclusion of this meeting today. So we will head straight into reviewing that kind of skeletal draft that went around before this meeting. And hopefully everybody had a chance to take a look at it. A big chunk of it was an appendix that was basically summarizing some work that Joanna's team at DEP has funded alongside FWC and some other folks that, you know, shorthand is being titled McEachran 2022. And so, but again, we felt it was really important coming out of last meeting to put something on paper, or start having folks read, look, touch and feel some ideas. So Alan, if you would go ahead and pull up our working note stuff. We're just gonna rip through this. I'd like to ask people to go ahead and raise hands when there's comments or questions. I'm just gonna read through for the sake of folks who may not be able to see their screen, and then I will stop at certain points to take those comments and or questions as we hit those prompts. So again, don't be shy. This is meant to be an active discussion. So again, from our March meeting summary notes that were approved earlier, we did go through that overview of Everglades restoration and the Recover program. The main takeaways from that were that recent water years have demonstrated that operational changes can bring large volumetric changes in freshwater deliveries to the northern estuaries and the southern coastal systems, with obvious potential impacts to the Reef system in Martin County, Palm Beach County, Broward, and Miami-Dade in particular. Overall, CERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, calls for more water storage and conveyance infrastructure that can reduce those unnatural discharges to the northern estuaries, while also increasing water quality, quantity, timing, and distribution to the Everglades and southern coastal systems that Ava outlined earlier in her presentation. We also talked a little bit about our current water quality monitoring efforts that Joanna just touched on again. Again, there's that reference to the McEachron Big 7 programs. We did talk briefly about looking at local versus regional monitoring. We talked about the monitoring needs emanating from authority-based management, as well as talking about how we need to think about linking water quality data to coral health and ecosystem function. And then the team also did participate in some other discussions on incorporating other kinds of data. In particular, I know that DEP had mentioned coastal construction permitting and looking at some of the data coming out of that and some of the data architecture that DEP is working on to integrate every source of information the department has access to into something that can be transferable and useful to other areas of the department. So I think that's kind of the March meeting in a nutshell. Anybody have any comments or questions emanating out of that as we enter into discussion of the documents? Okay, we'll move on to the next page. Can everybody see that all right, or would it help to zoom in a little bit more?
Zoom in just a smidge, please. Thank you.
Great. So in that working draft framework, there was a background section, again, just sort of bullets taken from that. And we know the implementation of Everglades restoration and other region-wide restoration activities can have significant impacts on Florida's coral reef. Those may be positive, those may be negative, but we expect that that action is going to be through expected changes in that freshwater flow and the quality, quantity, timing, and distribution of those flows to nearshore coastal waters within the South Florida ecosystem. As we mentioned with Ava, there are some new projects that are coming online, BBC or Biscayne Bay and Southeastern Everglades ecosystem restoration being one, Southern Everglades being another, right off the tip of my tongue, that could bring substantial new water to the southern coastal system. These projects are really malleable right now during the planning phase, and so there's a wide range of outcomes that could emerge from them, depending on all the various considerations that the Corps needs to undertake in their feasibility study analysis. I think we're all in agreement. There is actually a great deal of water quality data being collected along Florida's nearshore coastal waters, including on the reef. But again, those data have not been part of a unified network that's comparable regionally, nor with the exception of the recovered data, have they been incorporated into system-wide assessments of Everglades restoration progress. And again, reflecting the growing consensus of the value of Florida's coral reef within the South Florida ecosystem, this team is charged with developing a unified water quality monitoring framework and also recommending ecological indicators for the reef for consideration by the Science Coordination Group. Ultimately, that is all to better inform decisions that are being made with respect to restoration activities upstream of Florida's coral reef, and likely that will aid in restoration of Florida's coral reef itself. I think that is a pretty good summation of what we're trying to do here. Does anybody have any comments or like to initiate any follow-on discussion of the rationale here? Okay, great. The next piece that we'll talk about is the approach that was laid out in the document. This really flowed from some of the conversation that we had in March. And namely, step one is pretty much what Joanna had just discussed and updated us on, an inventory of existing monitoring programs and its integration with the McKeekeron et al. 2022 nutrient monitoring data. Step two is really kind of where this framework could make the next step if folks agree. Looking to design a monitoring program to actually detect changes in water quality along the coastal marine environment attributable to Everglades restoration and freshwater management system-wide changes. Again, I'll clarify that clearly that is what Recover is doing along that 500-meter oligo-mesohaline strip. But the question is, should we look further out beyond that 500 meters, and should Florida's coral reef be considered a part of that? Step three would look at crosswalking the monitoring needs identified in step two to the existing programs identified in step one. Essentially, in some ways, a gap analysis there. And then step four would look at implementing recommendations to existing monitoring programs to detect change from Everglades restoration. What could also add, necessary additions to the monitoring, whether that's new programs or other modifications. And again, to inform upstream and Florida's coral reef restoration activities. So given the team's charge, and hopefully this one elicits a little bit more conversation, is this the right approach? Are we on the right track? Eric, you sound like you want to.
Well, going back to step two there, Wes, I think you're hitting on a lot of the complexity is in step two. And part of that's designing a monitoring program. And I kind of feel like that's an open discussion that we could work on. Part of that is using some other existing programs that may exist in the world that we could look at to get some more guidance on how to go about doing this. There's lesson learned in monitoring from Recover here within Everglades. And there's probably lessons learned from the coral reef programs under the Coral Reef Task Force in particular that could help us understand that end of it as well. So I feel like there's a lot of work to be done into, and it doesn't all have to be a starting from scratch mode of doing this. I feel like there's a number of good experiences out there in both positive and negative way that are informative and could help us do that step two well. And back to the team's charge, and I'll toss this out to the team. There's a question of efficiency and how we go about getting that step done. That's tough. That's something we need to have a conversation about. It can quickly fall into the tragedy of the commons scenario, and everyone's assigned, so nobody gets it done. So we'll have to work on making that not be the case. Make sure we're being precise about what we're trying to do here. Back to you.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Thoughts or comments on the steps as laid out in the draft? Shelley, please.
Hi, so the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary Water Quality Protection Program Steering Committee has, I was trying to look up the exact language from the minutes, but are kind of in the process of reviewing the current water quality monitoring, the CERC. And we've talked about we have a management committee and a technical advisory committee. And so this really dovetails really well into what you're talking about right now. So basically, for the record, I wanted to pull in the capacity that the Water Quality Protection Program has, and that we're currently talking about kind of the exact same things right now.
Great. Yeah, it's really important that we focus on that efficiency that Eric mentioned and utilize existing capacity as much as possible, especially when we're working on similar things. Wade, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley, for that. I was going to bring up the same thing, but in addition, I know the charge is to develop a monitoring program, but at the end of the day, and we wrestle with this all the time because we've been funding monitoring work for over 30 years. You've got to have the next step as well. It's not just monitoring, but what do you do when you detect a change? Where are we at in implementing some kind of plan to make adjustments to water flows or what have you if we do detect a change? And what is that threshold? And I think that we need to be answering those questions up front, because if we want to know what it is we're monitoring for, then we need to know at what levels we need to be monitoring, because there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure you're monitoring not only the correct things, but at the correct levels. So I just wanted to bring that forward for everybody to think about, is what do we do if we detect change?
Eric?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up there for Wade on that one. I think you're really hitting on something important that we talk about in the monitoring programs throughout Everglades Restoration, and that I refer to it as management levers. I just look at the management levers that we can touch and kind of try to understand, when we do detect change, what levers are available to us. When do we actually need to detect, respond to those levers? Sometimes having some patience is really critical. So you can take some time and watch small change and recognize that. And other times we need to be ready. And so I guess, again, throwing it back your way, in those cases where you've asked the question in the past about when to respond and how you respond, how did you go about establishing, or does anybody have any experience with establishing, kind of pre-mapping out those thresholds in advance on a topic like water quality? What are the critical thresholds we're watching for? How will we respond when that time comes? I can envision some expert solicitation types of routes so I'll just throw that out here as a possibility.
Nikki?
Yeah, what Eric just said kind of made me think about the fact that, do we actually know for a lot of the corals what is good water quality, and what are our targets? What are we trying to meet to make sure that the reef is healthy? There's definitely some ideas that we know that some things are too high, but for all of these variables that we might be monitoring for, do we have good targets?
Wade?
So I like your question, Eric, and I don't have a good answer for you. We can do it in, let's call it an acute scenario. If you have water quality and you have high exceedances, you can do things on the acute scale. If you're looking at it in a longer term, that becomes more difficult. So I don't really have a great answer there, but I will say the other thing to consider here is, we're talking about water quality, but we probably need to broaden our thought about what parameters we're taking in outside of just the standard water quality parameters that we typically think about. And the reason for that, and sometimes you can't break it out, but the reason for that is that oftentimes other parameters in the environment are more responsive than we can measure. For example, nitrogen loading. We don't necessarily get down to really low levels at times. And yet the phytoplankton components might be telling us something more. It may make the response muddier, but in some cases, I think we may need to be looking outside of the standard DO, nitrogen, phosphorus, and so on.
Ian, I think I saw your hand up at one point in time. Do you still want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just say that I'd like to be direct to Nikki's excellent question. I think that we don't have a very good understanding right now. My scientific opinion is that we need a lot more parameterization work and understanding of species-specific responses of the keystone species in the Florida Keys, and specifically the reef species. I'll also say that I think there's a really important temporal issue at hand here, and that there is so much seasonal fluctuation in these targets, in these things, these water quality targets, and that our monitoring program needs to, or any monitoring program needs to really be able to dial that in and constrain that and understand on a seasonal level how these things are fluctuating, because the targets are ultimately going to be driven by that. Especially if we want to detect what is causing these breaches and these thresholds.
Thank you. Laura, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. I just kind of wanted to connect to the pieces. So talking about the water quality monitoring plan idea, and then Wade's response kind of on like, what is the response once we have that data? And I'd also like to mention the middle piece there, and that's the operational access to the data. So how fast are we going to be able to see this data and then potentially respond? You know, what are our quality, our QAQC levels? What, you know, are we going to have access to telemetry? Are we waiting to upload to repositories? So that's going to have to be a discussion as well, because we might be discussing, you know, seeing and detecting change, but we might only be able to look, you know, a year back or 5 years back. We might not be able to see as up-to-date information, and that might be an additional constraint with this monitoring program.
So clearly, I'm hearing a lot of challenges for this, right? I don't think anybody is surprised by that, right? And that is definitely something that we need to do. I think we can definitely spend some more time talking about the specifics of how that monitoring would come together, what it should look like. We can talk about an ideal resource unconstrained model versus trying to cobble together the best we can to make, you know, the best out of what we've got. I do just want to pull it back to the approach, though, right? Without delving too much in the details of any of those individual pieces, as we're kind of going through this process of developing a monitoring framework, whether it's water quality or, you know, more expansive to include kind of what Wade was talking about, that there may be other monitoring that can sort of be a little bit of a cheat code as well, whether it's biological or ecological monitoring. Are we missing something here in trying to develop a framework? Is there, I mean, again, are these the right steps to take? Shelley.
So there's a lot of new technologies right now, and I would propose inviting some of the companies that, you know, make and sell these new technologies to talk to this group. I was able to listen to the March meeting, and not only satellites and remote sensing, but in situ data sondes. And I would propose that we have the people who make these products tell us what capacity they have and some of the costs and some of those things as we go into this new framework.
Wade?
Yeah, so I'm gonna come back to what I mentioned earlier. If you scroll back up to the 4 steps, I think what we maybe should consider doing is adding in a 5th step, wherein it cycles back and asks the question again at step 2. Do we need to make changes? So you roll through, you look for implementation possibilities, but then you ask again, do we need to go back and look at a redesign of the monitoring program to make sure we're capturing what we need? And you iterate it that way.
Sure. An adaptive management sort of approach to the framework.
Right, but it's still focused on the monitoring itself. Exactly.
Correct. Yeah. And so some other responses, some other thoughts that I had just in hearing some of you speak before as well, and just to raise 2. Obviously, we're sort of operating at the confluence of Everglades restoration and Florida's coral reef. So not necessarily every parameter of interest to reef health may be good to include in a monitoring framework for understanding how Everglades restoration may be impacting it, right? I remember specifically last time, I don't remember who it was, but there was a lot of fear of sargassum coming into the system and being a major detriment to the reef. But for instance, if this group doesn't anticipate that Everglades restoration would impact sargassum prevalence or distribution, then probably not the best fit for a framework focused on, again, the confluence of Everglades restoration with the reef. So I want to kind of make sure we're staying focused on that portion of our charge. I also want to again highlight, we are supposed to make recommendations as necessary for ecological indicators for restoration at large. That is one way in which the work that we do can influence the design and ultimate implementation of Everglades restoration projects that have yet to come online, right? So in some ways that is part of, Everglades restoration comes from the same adaptive management style of thought that you are monitoring in part to create changes in implementation, and I totally get and appreciate Wade's insight that we can also adaptively manage the monitoring specifically rather than actually the projects too. But I think we're kind of wearing both hats here. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments or thoughts.
Wes, while you're taking a pause there, just wanted to check in with you and Eric if the notes I'm taking on screen are helpful or distracting. You can advise as needed.
I'm not distracted.
Okay, just checking.
Is there anybody who thinks that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joanna, and then Nikki afterwards.
Wes, I was just going to throw in my support for what you were saying about essentially for this first step in order that our framework and kind of check the box, we might want to narrow the playing field of what we're actually looking at as it relates, kind of focus in on our primary task of Everglades restoration projects and the things that we need to monitor for to detect that. While keeping an eye on the broader management questions that are related to ecosystem and reef health. But I think in order to just kind of show an easy win first step is answer that one question, because those broader questions that we're kind of already getting into, we've been challenged by those for decades as we look at reef health. And so I think if we open that widely right now, we won't actually get to the product that we're looking for quickly enough. And so I would recommend and emphasizing trying to narrow our playing field at first, and then after that's accomplished, move on to the broader ecosystem health conversation.
Okay, Nikki?
Joanna beat me to it. I was actually also going to agree that I like how step 2 is somewhat narrow, and maybe even needs to be further narrowed in the description of what kind of monitoring we're looking at, so that when a panel is formed for going into it, they are able to really dig into those specific targets that we're looking for.
Is there anybody that feels like the 4 and now 5 steps there in the approach are just off? We're on a wild goose chase going the wrong direction. Okay, well then let's take the opportunity then to dive in a little bit deeper onto step 2 in particular. Okay, and so this kind of stems from that discussion a little bit in thinking about how to design a program, an ideal program. Again, what would we expect the impact of Everglades restoration to be on Florida's coral reef and associated marine habitats? It's kind of what we've been asked to do in some ways. As simple as that seems, obviously, I think there's, as we just saw, right, that can go a lot of different directions. So right off the bat, definitions matter. When Ava's slides, there were blue dots and white dots. There was Everglades restoration under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. There were non-SERP projects like Kissimmee River. There were, management activities like the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. There was this new resilience work that's being done. Does this group have any thoughts on how we should define Everglades restoration for our purposes here? Nikki?
I think we could definitely think about any project that is working towards restoring historical flows, natural flows within the Everglades area. I think there's like a South Florida biological area that we could also use kind of in that idea of the Everglades, so that we aren't necessarily having to only pick specific building plans.
Wade?
One of the things that strikes me, and I actually have started this conversation with a couple of people, is that as we begin to restore flows down through the Everglades, we're going to redistribute the volume of water significantly, especially into Florida Bay. And so maybe one of the things we need to look at is where is most of the water going and how can we get a baseline assessment ahead of a lot of that restoration so we understand what's happening. Because if you're monitoring real time, you may not know where it was. So if we look maybe at a mass volume type layout where we can look at where the water is outflowing, then we can set up some baselines to give us a better place to start.
Yeah, I agree with that. So so what it sounds like is folks don't necessarily want to be constrained by Everglades proper. The Central and South Florida project infrastructure, essentially how man is currently moving water through the system, is an important component of what we're evaluating here. Am I hearing that correctly? At least on the regional scale. Anybody disagree with that statement? Okay. Next sort of definition to think about and look at, Florida's coral reef and associated marine habitats. Now, the charter sort of lays out, the team charter sort of lays out what that is. So I'm a little less concerned with the strict textual definition, but more so how, and really it bleeds into the next point, how do we delineate the monitoring region of interest here? Clearly, the Recover program, you saw the shaded areas in the southern coastal system. Looks like it includes all of Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay, but leaves out the reef tract itself and obviously does not continue further north. Anybody have ideas on how geographically on a map we should be looking at essentially this region of interest? And I raise this because there's a lot of different nomenclature that's tossed around in the skeletal documents. And even when we talk about nearshore environment, we talk about marine environment, we talk about the offshore reef, we talk about patch reefs. What are folks thinking of when they're thinking of the region of interest that we're interested in?
Hey, Wes, quick question. Is this something, if I may, right, not part of the technical team here, but is this a regional, are you talking about from an Everglades restoration standpoint or a regional influence on reefs?
All of the above.
All of the
right?
above.
I mean,
Yeah, so I think
not necessarily. So it leads into our question about, I guess, what we project the impacts of restoration, of Everglades restoration, to be on the reefs, right? If there is substantial, massive flows into Florida Bay, how far south do those impacts extend potentially?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd offer, based on my understanding, if this is a East Coast SERP related topic, something to consider is, the lower East Coast, and the overall features associated with that, the different regions. There are 3 different regions, and this gets into the weeds of restoration that maybe the coral folks aren't necessarily, well versed in as of yet. We'll get there sooner than later, but the East Coast buffer region, one being up around Loxahatchee, another one being south of basically starting at the northern end of 3A area down the entire East Coast of the greater Everglades, as far as where the focus of restoration buffer projects are. So I don't know, just floating that out there.
Sure, and I get and I definitely see that. I guess I'm asking, are we looking inside of that 500-meter strip, right? Okay. Or are we just looking at the outer reef? Dana, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, and I guess this isn't the first time the discussion has been had on how do we monitor changes in water quality from a coral reef conservation perspective, right? And so, I mean, DEP, with support from NCOS, the National Center for Coastal and Ocean Science, one of the monitoring programs in this matrix was intended to be developed as a coral reef centric monitoring program. And so I feel like we might be revisiting some questions that, and that were kind of fleshed out, at least for the ECA region, and thinking about how would we design a water quality monitoring program that's focused on coral reef ecosystems and can help us measure changes as a result of investments to reduce land-based sources of pollution. And that's, when I mentioned in my updates about the watershed management plans that our program has been supporting, that's the intent there. And it would be great to be able to detect any impacts from those investments in the development of an implementation of watershed management, both at a scale the size of the Everglades, as well as at the smaller scales that we've been biting off and looking at the influence of coastal inlets and the delineation of these inlet contributing areas. So I guess I would suggest that we kind of take a look at the geographic scope of these, in terms of how far out to go in the coastal and marine environment at these monitoring programs. And that one in particular, that was designed with the intent of evaluating water quality in the coral reef ecosystem. So I don't know the exact answer, but I know that that was the intent when that water quality monitoring program, which DEP, is now implementing, was designed.
Right. Well, we can definitely add that to the list of things to take a look at further too. Any other comments or questions about sort of delineating a region of interest? I mean, it sounds like looking at the southern coastal system out to the reef tract, given uncertainties in what we might see where, that'll probably be a safe position to go, and we can tailor from there. Kind of, and I think this next bullet point pulls a little bit from what Wade was talking about, both in terms of baseline, water flow, as well as where we would expect to see changes. And so we can certainly look at, those specific basin areas or inland contributing areas in particular, for more change. Should we also look at planned operational changes, right? I'm thinking at the northern end of the system, obviously where LOSUM is coming into play, should expect to see a lot less water, a lot less frequently. Does anybody have any thoughts on building a framework around also capturing some of that, as well as the non-restoration projects? I mean, I think we sort of covered that kind of all the drainages that are regional in scope matter. So maybe we already answered that question a little bit. Anybody have any other thoughts to add?
Take the gap here for just a second, Wes. I think one of the pieces of this is, and it might be for people that haven't to spend as much time on the restoration side of it, is just maintaining awareness that as the programs, projects get put in place on a landscape, there's also this parallel projects on the IDS that deal with just updating the combined operating plans. And I'm going to say that plurally to not have it just fall under the current COP, but under a general sense of how we manage water across South Florida. So I do think there's operational components that are inherent to this program. And then there are other operational components that are more project specific and might be sequentially implemented over time. That'll be a little bit more difficult to do in a proactive way or, planning going forward. So water management operations inside SERP and water management operations, call it SERP adjacent, are both to me at least critical pieces. And I think Deb just put a hand up, so I think maybe she's got some thoughts on these same issues. So I'll stop now. Deb.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad you brought this issue up, Wes. And so despite our best efforts, this is not a reef specific issue, but the altered water flows with regard to a lot of our restoration projects in Lake Worth Lagoon are definitely going to be impacted, because despite our best efforts in LOSUM and bringing up these issues consistently, we were very dismayed to learn of the recommendation through LOSUM that in order to achieve zero flows to the St. Lucie River and estuary, that one of the solutions that's contemplated is to put more water unwanted and in an excess amount into Lake Worth Lagoon. And so we are about 8 or 10 miles away from the nearest inlet at that discharge point where Lake Worth Lagoon would be getting more water. And so a lot of that does not find its way because it's an area where we don't get a lot of flushing. So it may not affect the reef tract, but it will most certainly affect estuarine habitats that we have been investing a lot of money in building islands and such. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think this issue of the alteration of water flows, especially associated with LOSUM, and making sure that we've got a good data set to help understand those changes in hydrology would be super helpful. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Noted. Yeah, thanks for being here, Deb. Joanna.
Thanks. I'm also going to, since I don't think we have any Martin County representatives on the line today, I'm also going to just speak on behalf of including, as you mentioned, the at least looking at the benefits of the reduction to the offshore reefs from the reduction of flow to the St. Lucie reefs in particular. We know that saltwater plumes were found at depth where the corals are because of the previously high volume of flow. And I think that might be a location that we could consider showing the benefits of these conversations and potentially even looking at ecological indicators there, like coral recruitment and things that may come back with reduced flow.
Yeah, and much of the same that oysters are being used in other areas of the system. All right, let's go ahead and scroll down. And we just want to keep this moving because I know we're gonna run up on time faster than we want. We spent a lot of time.
I was gonna say that.
Oh, yeah, please.
Oh,
Is
I
that
was gonna
Angela?
say that. No, there is a
Oh,
representative.
Elizabeth.
No, this is. Yes, there is a representative from Martin County here, and I'm glad to join you all. And I definitely agree with what Joanna just said. We definitely need to look into that. Like I said, we've been trying to look at some of the water quality issues that we have here, trying to get good quantification of which nutrient source is coming from where. And if we could look into that and look at all of that, I think that would be important.
Great, thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to stay on this question really fast. I think looking at the BBCW, especially the Deering Estate rehydration, kind of to Wes's point previously that, here's something that isn't not necessarily a future alteration, but something that's already been implemented. And we've seen rebounds, especially in a freshwater and estuarine associated species, and those that we know that are moving offshore. So if we're thinking about a monitoring plan and we're looking at that connection, especially in Biscayne Bay, we've got a lot of ground within this, historical estuary, as we call it. Primarily looking at those species that are not sessile, that are able to move across that, that connection, go out the inlets, and get offshore to the reef within their normal life histories. I think that might be a good connection piece there. And this is one of those studies that's been implemented already that we've seen successes for those species.
And so, yeah, that may be another good note for going slightly beyond water quality, as long as it's still tied to the restoration work that's happening in place. Looking at program design, we spent a lot of time talking about this. I have a feeling this is where most people really want to dig in because of how technical it can get. I'm going to ask that, and because we're short on time in general, we're going to send this document out to the entire team afterwards and ask folks to physically put comments down on paper for us so we can help integrate it all. But I just want to kind of skip down to the prompts. Again, I sort of mentioned looking at an idealized resource unconstrained perspective versus a minimum needs perspective. Does this group try to focus on both and define those? Any thoughts or opinions on which direction we should head? Wade.
In regards to your second highlighted area, the given differential conditions, I think the right answer is probably going to be that you have to do some of both, because what we're really aiming for is what's protective of a coral reef. What are the indicators there? And when you're talking pure water quality, those are probably going to be consistent throughout. I don't know why we would look at anything different depending on where you are. However, you're going to have other non-water chemistry type parameters that might differ, sedimentation, algal content, things like that. So I think the proper answer is probably both. And it's going to be project or location specific for some, but broad in many of the others.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it wouldn't necessarily be the role of this team to, define that project level monitoring, right? However, again, I think we do need to kind of key in on the parameters of interest. so that we can help the folks like the Corps and others who are designing the projects to key in on the right features in their monitoring, design, and ultimately implementation of the project.
And I can say that EPA, I think this was brought up at the last meeting, but EPA and the state have been working together to try and figure out which of those parameters are probably the most responsive for coral reefs. And I know that's still ongoing. So there may be other places we can reach to that have done this before. Similarly with the Water Quality Protection Program out of the Keys, I know some of this has been done in the past.
Great. And I'll just add, I don't think we need to have all of the answers. I think we just need to also decide where to draw lines right now. This is, I may be too fond of saying that all of our work in government is an iterative process. So, you know, this is just the one-time step as far as I'm concerned. Any other thoughts or comments on the design question? Okay, well, I hope to get some very specific answers in the coming weeks when we send this home for homework. We'll move on to step 3, looking at the crosswalk between the monitoring needs and, you know, whatever sort of program needs to be developed. With respect to existing monitoring, and this really bleeds from the conversation on Joanna's stuff as well, are folks feeling like there may be some meaningful value in other data sets that have not already been identified? Joanna specifically talked about data sets that didn't have nutrient information involved. And the other question is, again, kind of, are we looking to limit this framework to just water quality, or to Wade's point, and to other people's thoughts that I heard kind of coming through? Is it actually a smart thing for us to also be looking at biological and ecological monitoring as well? CJ, the fish guy is going to weigh in on biological monitoring, I assume.
Yeah, surprise there. And no surprise that I would certainly advocate in favor of biological or ecological monitoring along these lines. I think that obviously measuring water quality and its influence to the reef is going to be kind of it's going to be complex, but it's going to have to be a multifaceted monitoring framework, and probably looking at multiple trophic levels there too, as we work our way up to the reef to see what the impacts actually are. I think that's that would be my 2 cents on the issue.
So CJ, as a quick follow-up on that, do you think it'd be a big lift or a relatively easy lift to differentiate between, say, event-based types of biological monitoring, seasonal types of biological monitoring, and then the longer-term trends that are happening? So I feel like they're in distinctly different categories. And when we take the easy way out and just look at a chemical parameter, it's just a matter of continuing to hammer away at that one chemical parameter over time and different ways of analyzing it. But I think from a biological or ecological standpoint, that might have complexities in terms of how you would even sample and go about doing that on those different timeframes. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Eric. I think, and obviously the devil would be in the detail as to kind of how we do, like what kind of framework we would, if we decided to move forward with something as like biological or ecological monitoring. I would think that probably would, yes, I would think looking at it in the long term probably, and how these changes incorporate over time is probably going to be, we might be able to see some snapshot pulses of things that are occurring here and there. But overall, I think the broader question is, what are the longer term ramifications of improved water quality, increased water flow for both not only the coral reef, but also some of these nearshore ecosystems that ultimately feed out into the reef. So that is kind of thinking more from the perspective of a resources unconstrained, idealized thought process. But obviously, we would need to hone in on this as we develop further in this process here, Eric.
Sure. And I just to close on that topic, I can also picture ways that we can look at ecosystems in these shallow coastal areas, kind of the bottom up and top down approaches to that. So, from the big fish approach to macroalgae type of approach. I don't know. I just thinking about how you think about that from the two different ends of the physical scale as well. So.
Well, and now I'm starting to hear ecological indicator conversations happening too, right? So which is sort of what we've been asked to look at also. So Dana?
Yeah, I just, think it would be really important to, before start talking about, what approach we might want to incorporate regarding ecological or biological monitoring, is get consensus around the questions we want answered and make sure they're not already being answered. So there are a lot of long-term coral reef ecosystem monitoring data sets out there, and they answer different questions. So we have, long-term status and trends monitoring along the entire system that's been happening through the National Coral Reef Monitoring Program, NCREMP. And so we have long-term status and trends data. If we're looking for data related to changes in ecosystem health related to specific management measures, that's another thing. And so the point being, there's a lot of biological and ecological monitoring happening on coral reef ecosystems in Florida. I just named one program. There are several others, comprehensive ones. I think it would be important to just first have consensus around what are the specific questions we're looking to answer if we're talking about monitoring of biological resources.
Any other thoughts?
This is Elizabeth. I was just thinking maybe we could do a staged approach, like to start with just water quality monitoring, and after we learn some of the data, to expand to other biological and ecological indicators.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this portion? I'm just gonna keep us moving so we can keep going, because we are approaching time when we'll have to pull back. Just the prompt here in terms of evaluating existing program, existing monitoring, and making adjustments. And I think it kind of in many ways kind of speaks to what Dana was mentioning as well, maybe from the other perspective, is do we need to understand the original objectives of existing programs better in order to access them, right? To utilize them. Or is simply knowing what they're collecting, where and when, sufficient?
Wes, I will suggest that we could think of this one as being something we can narrow down a little bit better as we think about the management levers side of it. So as we start to draw it out and draw the connections between the existing monitoring programs, we start thinking about what management levers we can throw at a given time, then maybe we'll have better understanding of the value of the existing programs and if they're sufficient in meeting our needs. And yeah, I think that's perhaps a way to think of it, unless somebody has, a little more upfront information today. Just a path.
Yeah. And that's really what we're looking to clarify here, honestly, today is what path do we take, right? We have some initial words down on paper, and we're looking to see whether we keep fleshing that out a little bit more, redefine, rescope, and we're just gonna keep working on increasing the clarity of what we're trying to do here. Laura.
Yeah, I would just kind of throw a wrench in this for a second and kind of take it back to not necessarily looking just at the original objectives of these existing programs, but we should really be looking at, for these existing programs, what was the end result of the data? You know, how is the data being used? What questions is that data specifically trying to answer? And then do those questions align with what our objectives are here? I don't really think we necessarily need to do, an evaluation of the original objectives if we don't think that the end user of the data, the end question, the end results are, the outputs are going to be evaluative enough for, what we're trying to get out of that data.
That makes sense. So I think we'll kind of stop there. Step 4 was essentially looking at implementing recommendations, the monitoring programs. We have a step 5 to consider now as well. And so I think we have a lot to chew on even before we get there. But again, so what I'll ask, and Alan and Eric and I will get together, we'll get this document out to everybody. And we would ask everybody to try to be thoughtful about putting to print some answers or thoughts to some of those prompts, suggest new prompts if you'd like, and answers to that, so that we can go on and keep working on building a consensus around what we're trying to achieve here. So that would be great. And thank you all for your contributions to that discussion. At this point, Alan, I think we'll kick it over to some public comments before closing out.
Yes, we'd like to now invite any of the public on the line. If you would like to make public comment, go ahead and raise your hands and we can unmute your microphones in order for you to make any comments. Give everyone a moment to see if they have anything that they want to offer to the group. Not seeing any hands at this time, Wes.
Okay.
Could we get, Alan, are we sure that that's working right? Could we get one test hand from somebody in the public to be sure that that function's working? I hate to miss them because it's not lighting up.
So true. I do believe the raise hand feature should be available, but yes, could we have anyone from the attendees just,
Okay,
thank you,
there it
Alexander.
is.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
now I'm
it.
more comfortable. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Alexandra Fine.
Yes.
Yours was the hand that I saw go up.
Perfect.
Also, I think we do have one working group member on right now. Karen, I don't know if you wanted to say anything to the group before we move on, but I'd like to invite you to have the floor if you'd like.
Hey Wes, hey everybody. Whoops, my camera's closed. Nothing much to say. I just was interested in hearing this conversation today about this framework as I was helping to put it together behind the scenes originally, but good discussion. A lot of really good points were brought up to think about, and you've got my wheels spinning. So I look forward to helping as much as I can with the follow-up. So thanks, Wes, for leading us today. That was really interesting.
No, thank you, Karen. And I was just about to say and give you credit for pulling that together for us along with Victoria Barker. So thank you guys. And we'll need all the help we can get pulling comments together and continuing to build this into a very good product. Eric, do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to say to the group? And then I'll kind of go into potential schedule stuff.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to the group here and the people speaking up and engaging and helping us out on this process and recognizing, as Wes said, it's iterative. I think of it as being a pretty messy process right here at the start, but that's normal. That's to be expected. And it's supposed to be a little painful right now, trying to figure our way through doing something new. So I really appreciate everyone engaging, and in particular, thank you in advance for the feedback we'll get on the written document as we get that shared and out to the team. So back to you, Wes.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So yeah, so what I think I'd propose is that we'll send this out and we'll ask for written feedback, both to the prompts on this document, as well as edits, thoughts, etc., on the unified framework skeletal draft, working draft. And I think if you could get those back to us, let's say by July 14th, so that gives everybody about 2.5 weeks from when it originally got sent out. Last Friday or so, 3 weeks. Is that 3 weeks? I don't know. And again, nothing's like super rigid here. So when you can get it to us, you can get it to us. But if we could try for July 14th, I think that will give our volunteers an opportunity to actually make some of those edits and develop new prompts, within the 2 weeks after that, so that hopefully we could get everybody another draft by the end of July, and then maybe even receive some additional comments by mid to late August, so that we could really have a more defined product in front of us for the next working group meeting in September, right, Alan? September 7th, is that what we're looking at?
Correct. Yes, the working group will be meeting the 6th and 7th, and our group will be meeting on the 7th afternoon, looking at.
So we're looking at September 7th, again, the 1 to 4 time slot, probably. There might be some variation in that. We'll get that information out as soon as possible. We were really hoping to do this in person as much as possible. And we are working on some incentives to make that more worth your while. Maybe some immersive experiences. So stay tuned for that. We will get that information out to team members as soon as we have a little bit more information on what we can pull off. But we really want to bring this work home to you all, and hopefully get you all out of the office a little bit. So with that, let's see if there's any other team members who have anything else to add before we drop off here. All right. Well, great. I hope everybody has a fantastic 4th of July holiday, and looking forward to getting back all that written feedback, and then we will look forward to seeing each other hopefully in person on September 7th.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.